Good morning. This is another session, another episode of Teachers Talk Back. And not only have teachers been talking back and students talking back, but parents have also been involved in trying to ensure that there's freedom of expression in schools, freedom of inquiry, freedom to read. And Johnston, the Johnston School District, a suburb of Des Moines in Iowa, has been a real hotbed of political debate surrounding schools uh, and what can be taught in them or should be taught in them. And one parent that's been very involved in these conversations is Monique Zhao, and she's here with us. Hi, Monique.
Hi.
And I'll just more or less turn things over to you at this point. Would you go ahead and please talk about the debates that have roiled Johnston in recent years, even, and certainly
Sure.
they're ongoing. And when did these debates begin, and how you got involved, and what is involved with the debates and the
hmm
controversy? Please go
Okay.
ahead.
Sure. Well, I'm very happy to be here. And I can share a little bit about just my personal involvement.
Yes.
Maybe I do want to lead in by saying that I'm more of a behind the scenes supporter and advocate, and a lot of the kudos to what's been going on with the um, organization here in Johnston has been really strongly student led. There's also a lot of parent groups that have popped up that I've become involved with too. So there's a lot going on, and there's a lot to be involved in if anyone is interested. My interest and involvement, specifically with the schools, for me actually started way back during the pandemic when I became very interested in attending the board meetings online. I was finding that I did not feel that our school district was being open and honest and providing, maybe accurate and detailed, timely information about what was going on with COVID and the numbers in our district, the numbers in the community, some of the decisions that they were making. They were not communicating very well with parents. I did reach out to the principal of Johnston High School several times because of issues and concerns that I had with that. I did also find out that there were a lot of parents going to the school board about masking issues and things. And so I became very interested in following that. And that's where I started to see that parents were taking their issues to the board, and maybe not necessarily in the most constructive ways. There was a lot of, I guess I'll arguing, fighting, name calling, finger pointing. People were very upset. It was a very, I think, divided topic. People felt certain ways about wearing masks, and others, did not want to wear the masks or have their children required to wear the masks. So that got to be very, um, I think, controversial in the district. And so that's kind of where I became more involved and aware of maybe how much, I don't want to say influence or impact, but how much the community went to the board to try to raise things. Now, whether they listened or not, or whether they, took appropriate action, depending on, what side you were on, you know, was very different. And then fast forward to probably after the kids went back to school, things had kind of normalized a little bit. Um, my daughter got very involved with a group that is a student run, student led organization called CORE, and that stands for Community of Racial Equity. And through her and her classmates and other members of the group, I started to learn about lots of other things that were going on. And over the years, I've heard different things from my daughter about things that have been said to her, or things that she's overheard in discussions in school, things she's witnessed between students and teachers. Just kind of the general atmosphere of the district, and specifically, the high school building where she is. So through the students' voices, since I'm not a student, I'm not at the school, I don't see some of these things happening. I do maintain, pretty close relationship with my kids and their education. And so as far as things that they're learning, they're very open to discussing that with me, talking about what they're doing in class or, books that they're reading. And I've always been an advocate of having an open, diverse education. And when I started to find that there were concerns brought forward by others that some of the things that my children and others were being taught were not considered appropriate, I was pretty surprised. I know that a lot of the classes in the schools, they do give parents choices in terms of what they want their students to learn. But the way that some of those arguments and discussions were framed was that the parents did not have that choice and that we should be removing those choices for everyone. And I did not think that was right. Children, especially at the high school age, are and should be becoming free thinkers. They should be developing their own ideas. Of course, everyone has their own individual family background. Their parents teach them certain values and morals. But overall, we should be allowing our children to explore. And I felt that a lot of what was happening now, which kind of stemmed from the pandemic and a lot of the panic, and now it was being focused on what children were learning. And there was a huge panic about certain books, certain things in the curriculum, different concerns that parents were bringing. Whereas, I felt my children, I think, are mature enough and, they've had enough life experience to make some of those decisions or at least have those discussions with me. And it just seemed like a lot of the discussions that were happening were parents that just really wanted to control not only their children's education, but the education of everyone and really limit choices and decisions.
Mm-hmm. And what were those choices and decisions? What were
Well,
those
so
parents trying to shut down conversation, I guess, or shut down choice? What were they concerned about? And it's interesting to hear that it comes off. It seems to be at least intertwined or closely related to the masking controversies, which seem to be a
mhm.
package, right?
Yeah. Well, but at least
And
that was kind of the flow of how I, was kind of watching things progress is that, certain parents felt very, comfortable being vocal about their wishes for their children, which is great. We should all have the right to, parent our children or help them make decisions and things. But when you're turning it into, um, a child's education, and it's different from wearing a mask. A mask is a public health issue. Education is, for their future growth and development and, their intelligence, giving them opportunities, awareness about the world. So when it went to the level of, I don't want my child to learn about this. I don't want my child to read about this. I don't want my child to see these stories told about children that are not like my child. And I don't want anyone else to either. That's where I, became concerned that if you don't want your child to read a certain book, that's completely understandable. But don't take that away from another child, and especially children in the school district who do live those stories and who don't get to see people like them talked about in history or literature, and to take that away from children that may very well relate to those experiences, just did not seem equitable and was very concerning.
mhm. And were you mostly at this point, or at the initial phases of these content wars, let's call them, I guess, for a minute? Were you visiting the Johnston school board meetings at that point and hearing from these
Mhm.
parents? And what were you hearing
Yeah,
them say? What were they? Can you be uh, elaborate a bit on, what you heard them say about these books and what their arguments were
sure.
in? Okay, please.
Yeah. So there were some other things that came in between the masking and the book, basically the book bannings.
Okay,
There
what
were
do you?
lots of other issues, so we'll kind of jump to this one. But basically there was a request to have a couple of book titles banned from the Johnston schools, and this has also been going on in other communities. And the titles are typically titles that involve stories of BIPOC young people, maybe children, maybe adolescents, maybe young adults. It could be children within the LGBTQ community, but they were stories about the characters and their experiences. And as I had mentioned, maybe children in the school district have lived those same experiences and don't get to see stories like those, normally if they turn on the TV or read required readings for school or in, the history books and things. Um, so when I attended the board meetings, I was very encouraged to see not only parents there supporting um, this issue, but also, again, the students. And I will say that the students were very vocal in expressing that they really wanted to have these options. And they, didn't understand why certain parents could not be open to allowing their children to understand that not everyone grows up the same way, not everyone has the same life experiences, not everyone has the same um, things available to them as far as resources and opportunities. And I guess the main question is why these books or these titles were such a threat to these individuals that did not want them to be part of their children's curriculum. And I think for a lot of the parents on the side of wanting to keep those books is, how do we teach children to, be empathetic, to sympathize, to be able to get along with people that don't look like them, did not grow up like them, maybe don't necessarily speak the same language, but we all have to interact in the community. That being able to read about someone else's story takes away from that and takes away from the possibility that you can enrich your own education and your own life experience. And I would say I this is my own personal feeling, but I think they, personally were focusing on a lot of the wrong things and taking things out of context, specifically words or, specific phrases or words that are very important to actually telling the story. And I'm sure kids already know, kids are on their phones, they're on the internet, they watch movies and TV. I'm sure they've heard these words before. So seeing them shouldn't be necessarily a shock per se, or shouldn't be, something that they haven't seen or heard before. But it was the issue of not understanding that the way that the authors were using those words or phrases was very contextual, and that you had to read and understand what the author was trying to say in using those words and phrases, and also understand that it's not okay to use those words and phrases in general conversation. It's there for educational purposes within the context of the story.
Right.
So there
Well,
was
one of the
some. Oh, I'm
please
sorry.
go ahead.
I was
No,
just
go
going
ahead.
to say there was some controversy here, which very unfortunate, about someone using one of those words, and it should have not have occurred, and focusing on that word as the reason why their child should not read the book, but didn't take the entire context of the chapter or the overall discussion and theme of the book and just focused on that one word or phrase.
And so, what we're seeing, in my interpretation at least, is a single parent or maybe a group of parents going to the school board who pretty can powerfully affect conversations in the district.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, about I think it was Sherman Alexi's book about Native American
Mm-hmm.
experience and experiences as a Native American, and then a book whose name escapes me now. But there were two books, which was about the LGBTQ community, and probed and discussed issues of identity and
Mm-hmm.
development. That those were the themes that other book sounded, and these parents, these kind of power parents, and in some ways from a certain political viewpoint, were trying to keep these books
Mm-hmm.
out of the school and out of the hands of students. What and you said and you mentioned they take certain words out of context, but they have a motivation for doing so, a larger motivation, perhaps. I'll let you decide in terms of wanting to keep these books off the shelves. What are those motivations? What are their values that they hold that these books seem to violate and that they don't want any student
Mm-hmm.
exposed to?
Yeah, I guess personally, I'm not sure that I truly understand their values, but I do feel like within those groups, it's more of I, again, from my perspective, more of a hive mentality of um, they just kind of go along and maybe don't necessarily take the time to step back and look at issues. And if the particular political party or, others that are of a similar mindset and, thought pattern are saying this is bad or you shouldn't do this, they immediately say, oh, okay, and don't delve into it. I've found that the open discussion is just not there. Oftentimes, it's just a lot of literal and figurative yelling, just not listening and, closing their ears. And it just feels like they're very, at least the parents that were involved in this situation, we're very concerned as parents, maybe about their children, which that I completely understand. But it's the fact that if they don't want their children to read these books, they can certainly communicate that to the teacher, and their children don't ever have to read these books. They are always given options. It was taking it to the next level of the extreme of wanting to remove these from the curriculum altogether, remove these from the school library, remove them from the Johnson Public Library, whatever path they wanted to continue to take. And I can't say whether or not these parents have read these books, but in terms of me listening to their arguments and listening to their discussion, it really did not seem like they had. It just seemed like they had potentially maybe taken someone else's word, gone right to the page where the in their mind concerning phrasing or words were, and just focused on that. And I did sit down and read both of those books that were being questioned in Johnston. One was called The Hate You Give, and the other one was called The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, I think is, hopefully I got that correct, the Sherman Alexie book. And if you don't sit down and read the books cover to cover, you miss the entire experience. And what I guess is concerning to me is those experiences are important. My children are BIPOC children, but their experiences are not the experiences of those characters in either of those books. But for us to read those and to see how different the characters in the books' lives were, what they had to deal with, I think, not only for my children, but other children, as I mentioned earlier, it just helps create a better maybe understanding or empathy for how different people are. And when you take that away, I think maybe the motivation for these parents is they just want to have a very, I guess, bland and directed education for their children, which they can control for the most part when their children are young. But what are they going to do when their children graduate and are out in the world? They're going to experience people with all these backgrounds, and they're, in my opinion, it's doing young people a disservice to not allow them to have these resources available to them.
Yes, and I want to loop back. We've kind of entered this phase of this book banning, which, as you've suggested, is in other communities going on in Iowa and will,
Mm-hmm.
as well as nationwide. Uh, but following through here for a minute, well, let me just say that there are larger forces at work in
Yes.
in this uh, in this book banning phase that we're talking about now. And again, we'll loop back to the in between phase where there were other issues involved. But in this case, I know that that legislators have been involved in these debates as well, meaning Iowa
Mm-hmm.
state legislators, more specifically Republican
Mm-hmm.
legislators, and in Johnston, even more specifically Jake Chapman, a legislator, Republican legislator in the House of Representatives, as well as Brad Zahn. And I think Brad Zahn is also in the House of Representatives, is he not? Anyway, those two legislators in particular have actually appeared before the Johnston School Board, am I right? And discussed these books and have
Mm-hmm.
railed against them, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yes.
there's a there's a politics involved that these parents are enmeshed in and are hearing from these legislators and others too at the
Right.
national level. So
So to kind of tie that in with the legislative component, and I don't know, again, the students and my daughter are much better with all the details of the legislation because they've been advocating for, things and um, discussing it a lot more. But there's the House File 802 was an issue that came up as far as not allowing discussion of like, critical race theory in
right,
schools.
they yeah, they don't mention critical race theory in House File 802, but that's embedded in there,
Implied, yeah.
implied. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the words are no divisive concepts, and you cannot use the words systematic racism in
Hmm.
discussion of race or any other dimension of difference.
Right.
So those are outlawed, K through
Yes.
higher education.
Yeah.
So House File 802 seeks to arguably uh, hamstring, let's put it that way, at least, is discussions of race, gender, and sexual orientation, and
Hmm.
again, as their dimensions of difference.
Correct.
So, right, so House File 802, that's what it's about. So, how did you see that in terms of the Johnston experience?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, these parents that were proponents of removing these books from the curriculum and potentially from the school library, um, did try to gain support from these legislators. And, because of House File 802, maybe use that as a tool to say that, these books go directly against it. Teachers that are allowing students to read these books should be arrested. They're giving children materials that go directly against this um, legislative mandate. So we did have several very heated situations at the board meetings in Johnston here. We did have Jake Chapman, who at the time was in the House of Representatives, and I believe he did not get reelected. Or no, I'm sorry, I believe he was in the Senate and did not get reelected. Um, so he came to one of the board meetings, and then I believe Brad Zahn, and there was someone else, I can't remember his name. But they came and spoke on behalf of the parents that were advocating for the removal of these books, and, pointing to the law and what it says, just as you shared with us. But a lot of what they were saying is that, their argument is that, again, going back to that these children are being forced, or, they're not given an option, and that parents, don't have enough information about what these books are. And, it seemed like they were insinuating that these things were being fed to their children unbeknownst to them, which that has never been the case. As I said earlier, if a parent does not want their student to read a book, they always have options available for the students to select from. The curriculum has always been available to parents, either online, or they can always request information from the teachers. So the way that it was being presented and the arguments, against allowing these books, they were pointing to the legislation. Ultimately, Johnston decided to keep the books, which was a wonderful win, and clarify for parents that, again, they have the choice. They also, have more tools that they're creating for parents to be maybe more aware, or it's more detailed about some of the curriculum and things. So, fortunately, that situation ended well in this go around, but it's still kind of bubbling under the surface. And I'm sure it will come back up again at some point.
Was the vote unanimous on the board to keep those books? Do you know?
No, I don't remember what the vote was. I'm sure someone else would remember, but and I don't remember if that one specifically was discussed any further than the board meetings that we were at. But as of now, it's my understanding that it's status quo, with some things changed as far as transparency of making sure that parents have all the information that they need about what their students have the option to read. And should they choose, to not want them to read those things, then they can make that decision.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I asked that question in part, and now this. Well, I will say that I know that Brad Zahn was very aggressive towards students, and regards the the books that we've just been discussing as containing pornography. I think that's one of the words he smut. That's that kind of language, and that it was encouraging. The books were encouraging people to engage in improper sexual activities, let's call it, and that he would enforce the law, and that he would ensure people would go to prison if they were if they actually used this kind of material and presented it to students. And so it was very hard hitting in those terms.
Yes.
Proposed laws that would actually make it illegal for this kind of material to be placed into the hands of students. So I just wanted to put that out there. But one of the reasons I asked about the school board's vote on these books was because it takes us back to this gap that we want to fill in your experience as a parent, and in these controversies that have been taking place in the Johnston district. And that has to do with the school board election, the most recent school board election, in which there was an election, and there were three candidates who were actually elected, who were supported by Republican interests, let's call it, conservative, right wing, I think are fair terms to use. That it involves the 1776 pledge, which was part of Trump's approach to trying to influence the content in schools, and his administration. This also takes us to Turning Point USA, which you and Waverly have previously educated me about, and I've sought to understand more ever since. So, uh, please talk us through that and your
Mhm.
experiences with the school board elections. That really created a
Sure.
lot of controversy.
Yeah. And
And
again,
that was
so
just
that,
last. Was that last year, Monique? Yeah, it was in
yeah,
between that
yeah, it
July.
was
So
between the
book banning.
masking controversies and the issues with COVID and the book banning. So in between there, um,
Yes.
we had school board elections, and there were 3 seats that were open here in Johnston, and we had quite a handful of really good candidates. One of the other ways that I got involved, and again, thanks to the students, because my daughter Waverly and several other students that are part of the community of racial equity group, the student led group at Johnston, and there are chapters around at other metro schools and statewide schools. They wanted to get involved with helping one of the school board candidates. So I ended up meeting her through the students, going out and helping knock on doors and talk to people in the neighborhood. We went all over Johnston, different neighborhoods, meeting the community, introducing this candidate, really understanding where the issues were. And it was very interesting how I would say more people were not very open to discussion or opening their door, or in some cases were very rude. It was the minority of people that were willing to stand outside their front door and have a discussion about issues. So it was a very interesting experience for me, to kind of not only stand and watch it happen, but also be part of it and to see, you know, how much does the community know what's going on in the school district and how much should they be concerned, about what's going on. Maybe they don't have kids in the district. I have had 2 now. My son is older and he's in college, graduated. So Waverly's the last one in the district, and then I won't have any students. And if you don't have students, you may not necessarily know all that's going on. So for those that were willing to talk with us, I think they were very surprised. They maybe have seen some things in the news, but um, of those that spoke to us, a very good handful were willing to listen, were maybe willing to take action and also get involved themselves. And I noticed that over time, more people that were coming to the board meetings were people that didn't necessarily have children in the district. They lived here, they were community members, and they were equally concerned about what was going on. So that was a positive within the small group that we were able to interact with. But the school board elections themselves, I don't recall how many candidates. I want to say 7 or 8 total, maybe. There was a large group of candidates, and we felt very comfortable and confident that one of the candidates on our end, or 2 would prevail. But that ended up not being the case, partly because of what you had mentioned earlier, the 1776 pledge. There were 3 candidates that we call TED, capital TED. That stands for their last names, Tidball, Evans, and Davis. And they are 3 candidates that signed this 1776 pledge. Basically, my understanding was that they were running on one issue, and that was, again, backing up to the masking issue. They were running on the one issue of making sure that there was no masking in the schools anymore. And because of how big of a debate and controversy that was, a lot of people in this community were very upset, up in arms about their children having to wear masks. And so the vote went for that one issue, and these 3 candidates prevailed, partly because of the masking issue and partly because they signed this 1776 pledge. Since they've come into office, it has been very evident that that is really all that they knew. They did not have any other positive or negative agenda otherwise in why they wanted to be on the school board. They really don't have, at least from my perspective, don't have necessarily the unbiased view to understand the school district as a whole, and that they really have been focused on not just the masking issue, but maybe more to the TPUSA issue, really giving preference to and or support to and or a voice to those issues, which are maybe for the benefit of a very small group of students and families, and are ignoring the wider school district as a whole, other students, other groups. And it just has continued to seem to be very divisive as the school board, the new session, or, once they came into their positions, how the discussion has been.
Well, Turning Point USA, maybe we should explain a little bit to listeners, is an organization that goes back to 2012, and it was organized in order to try to, ultimately, it began to install local chapters of Turning Point USA in universities, colleges, and high schools. And and that particular organization describes itself as conservative, and it wants to restore patriotic education and capitalist values and what they call liberty in schools, which they see as under threat or being sidelined within schools
Mm-hmm.
and universities. They have a professor's watch list in which they are trying to track and to monitor and to on their website post who's on that list for having, in their view, taught or emphasized within their coursework as a negative attitude toward the United States, an
Mm-hmm.
unpatriotic attitude. And TPUSA sought to set up a chapter in Johnston High School, and these three candidates all supported the idea of having a chapter within the school. So, Can you talk, please, about that controversy, about
Sure.
the Turning USA chapter,
Mm-hmm.
the effort to install it, and those three candidates who were successful on the board were instrumental in having the chapter ultimately approved. So,
Mm-hmm.
talk to us about that, if
Sure.
you would, please.
So one
Hmm.
thing I would mention to your listeners is, if they don't know what TPUSA is, to definitely go out and take a look at the website and get a little bit more background as to why there are such great concerns about this organization as a national organization, and then bringing it into our schools. There's a lot of different facets to this issue. And one thing I did want to mention, you said that they do have professor watch lists. Well, they also have school board watch lists, and the Johnston School Board is on that watch list. And similar to what you had said about professors, they monitor school board decisions, votes on different issues. But if you looked up the Johnston Community School District, the last time we looked, and it's been a while now, but the board was listed out there. So I guess the main issue, well, there's many issues, but one of the issues is that in Johnston, you certainly can have student-sponsored clubs, but there has been a policy about nationally supported or nationally funded organizations, and there's certain rules and requirements that have to be followed if the school is going to have that club associated with the district. And speaking on a very high level, the application for the group was not necessarily reviewed and vetted according to policy. And it did bring up some issues that they later wanted to discuss in terms of maybe changing the policy. But as far as current policy, it appeared that they gave some exceptions that, maybe they shouldn't have in terms of the types of documentation this group had to show. One of the other concerns was a student organization, student-led organization should be started and led, and, whatever their plans are or their future growth are should be mainly managed by the students. In this particular group, it appeared that it was more orchestrated by parents who wanted this in the schools. And though they had a spokes student that stepped forward to be the president of this particular chapter that was applying, it seemed to be from the discussion that this was an idea born from the parents, that the parents wanted this. They were successful in getting the chapter started, and there was a president that did hold some meetings and things last year. He did graduate, and there is a new president. I'm not sure what year in school he is, but there hasn't been a lot known about what this group is doing. And one of the concerns is if you're a student group, you should be open to any and all students that want to be part of this group. And you should be meeting, at times at the school that students are able to be excused from classes, done with the day, and then they head to their groups or their activities or their sports. And it doesn't appear, I don't, again, I'm not at the school, but it doesn't appear from what I've heard that, certain things as far as student clubs are being followed with this group. Specifically, one of the things is that if you go out onto their website and you look at all of the things that they promise to provide to student members, they give away trips, they give away swag, they, give away all these things. And one of the concerns was some of the swag, the merchandise, the t-shirts, the posters, all the different things that they had last year. Their swag had guns all over it. And, is this really okay to have this kind of organization associated with our school district? One of the other things is we do have, or there are currently policies in place for when it's appropriate to use the logo. And, do we really want our Johnson Community School District logo associated with guns? I think they've changed their swag now. Their merchandise and things have different items portrayed on them. I don't think the guns are there anymore. But in that same regard, this group is a very structured group in terms of its national organization, where it is with the colleges and where it is with the high schools. They have a local representative that's mainly the leader or monitor of what they're doing. And that's not what a student group at a high school should necessarily be. But, they did get approved and they currently exist.
Right. TPUSA has paid field representatives.
Yes.
That makes contact with the local chapters, both in, as I understand it, in high schools and in colleges and universities. They're very highly organized. TPUSA, Turning Point USA, very well funded by Koch brothers money, and they send around representatives of their organization to often speak, at least at university campuses and maybe also the local chapters in high schools. I'm not sure if that's happened. But yes, Interesting. And I did want to ask, just going back a little bit to your door knocking, if I may,
Mm-hmm.
when you
Sure.
when you were supporting a candidate for school board who apparently was not elected. Uh, can you give that person's name and what her views were, and the kind of reception you were getting, at least
Mm-hmm.
from people who would talk with you?
Sure.
The
Um,
darn talking can be a kind of a sobering experience. I
yes.
understand that own experience, but
Yes.
please go ahead and talk a little bit, if you would, about your candidate and what she
Sure.
stood for.
So Leah Williams, she was a very big proponent for STEM education. She is an engineer by training and education and work experience. And she was very much in favor of, choices of parents, choices for parents, specifically when it came to the mask mandates. If parents didn't want their children to wear masks, that's the parents' choice. But overall, supportive of, you know, concerns of public health. Um, she was also the community sponsor for CORE. So CORE, it is a student organization. It's student run, but they do have community sponsors because there's certain things that the kids under age 18 can't do, like they can't set up a bank account for their club. They have to have an adult help them with that. To get their tax identification number and their 501c3 status, all of that had to be done by adults. And so Leah was one of the, and still is, she is one of the community sponsors of the CORE group. So that is how I got involved. The CORE students started scheduling times to go door knocking with her and walk around and listen to her speak to um, people in the Johnson community. And she's very engaging, very involved. She is very open to talking to everyone, very open to listening to differing viewpoints. Um, but I think the overall experience was one, as I said earlier, I guess I assumed just because, you know, of the way social media is now and things are, posted and known, that majority of the community kind of knew what was going on with the district and education. But that's not necessarily the case. Just because you live somewhere doesn't necessarily mean that you know what's going on day to day, within every facet. So I think it was a good education for me, to meet the different people and those that were willing to talk with us or with Leah, what their concerns were. And we did actually talk to a lot of teachers. They were willing to open their door and talk with us about some of the concerns that they had. Um, Other people in the community that maybe they didn't have children, but they had grandchildren in the district, and oh gosh, didn't know about these issues with books and issues with limits to what teachers can teach and discuss. And so it was kind of a, I guess, mini sharing of information among those community members that we got to talk to.
Sounds important and valuable. And what do you remember? What kind of concerns that the teachers expressed? Did they express, for example, that they feel like what they can say is under surveillance? What they might say could get them in trouble. That they feel like their professionalism is being called into question. Did they express anything along those lines, um, or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, not just those issues, but there's just been a lack of support of educators in our district anyway. And so, and that goes to, time in the classroom, time that they have to prepare for their classes, time that they're spending outside of the school building in their own, personal family time, having to do things. It goes to, concerns that I've heard a lot before about, lack of resources and not giving teachers enough funding to be able to purchase things for their classroom or do things in their classroom. Um, And I guess not focusing on those things, and maybe enhancing resources, and instead, going to trying to limit and restrict, and, which could then very well make teachers feel that they couldn't teach the way that they're used to teaching, or the way they have over the many years that they've taught, or had to rethink ways that they, bring up certain lessons and subjects, because, who's watching, and who might say something. So the concerns were very broad in terms of, overall, things that, teachers in general, or educators that, we got to speak with, were concerned about.
Mhm. And I've heard teachers say that just one parent will go to an administrator and said, this teacher is teaching this subject matter, which I find problematic. And that can have to do with how race or other issues of difference are taught in the classroom. So I just wanted to mention
Mm-hmm.
that parents, a discontented parent can make it difficult for an individual teacher who then has to uh, deal with, you might say, an administrator, including a superintendent or a principal, saying to
Mm-hmm.
them, "What are you teaching here?" Which is,
Yeah.
a difficult thing to field uh, as any employee who's an independent professional. But two individuals, one teacher and the diversity, equity, and inclusion
The director.
director,
Mm-hmm.
both of the school for and basically under the duress of them being called out by these by right wing or Republican legislators. Neil
Mm-hmm.
Patel left the district.
Yep.
Was it Lewis Fountain? Was that the name of the
Yes.
direct? Okay,
Yes.
so you've witnessed those departures. What do you think about that?
I think it's very unfortunate. I know Mr. Patel. My children, both knew him from school. I knew him from his involvement in all of these things. I've spoken with him on many occasions. I've heard him speak on many occasions. It's unfortunate that we're losing educators that are talented, that have a connection with the students, that understand how to reach young people, that we're losing these educators. And one other concern is Mr. Patel was one of potentially two teachers of color in the entire district. And now he's no longer teaching.
And his particular he was and I don't know the specifics of his experience. I know he's talked about them, and I'll be reaching out to him. He's given a wonderful interview on radio
Mm-hmm.
uh, on the show with Charity Nebbe called Talk of Iowa.
Yes,
Listeners,
we listened to that.
I did, and then I think it's Lewis Fountain
Mm-hmm.
also left because he felt a lack of support in the district. He had been hired and left pretty quickly as the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, was that another source of disappointment
Mm-hmm.
for certain individuals in the district?
Absolutely. Because I think from the get-go, he just did not have the support, and there were barriers and roadblocks set up that people just, you know, weren't willing to allow him to be successful. And there's such a need in our district for diversity. As I mentioned, as far as the administration and the teachers, as far as I know, and unless I missed something, I do not believe we have any teachers of color in the district. We have one administrator of color at the Summit Middle School. And so we, in terms of the adults in the schools, the administration and the teachers, there is a lack of diversity. So the students are not seeing teachers that look like them. They're not seeing administrators that look like them. They don't have an equity director now. to go to and, talk to about their concerns, which when he was in his position, he was very much an advocate for students and, any issues that they had. He would work with parents. He would be the liaison between the administration and, the schools and the parents. That's all gone now, and we don't have that. And what we're left with is, I believe, our superintendent is in charge of this now. And I, I can't imagine that people feel necessarily very comfortable with that as much as they did having Mr. Fountain in the position in terms of his availability and advocacy. He, on the other side, did not get the support for helping these students and families, so ultimately left the district. But in terms of student population, we have a very diverse student population that's just not reflected in the administration and the teacher pool that we have. And to see Mr. Patel leave, and I believe we had another student teacher or another teacher that, unless I'm mistaken, I don't believe that she ended up staying on or taking a job in Johnston Community School District. So, having those losses, not only those losses, but we've had multiple teachers leave just in general because of multitude of frustrations.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, this is very interesting. We're getting up close to an hour, and that's a long interview. But most welcome to hear all that you're saying. But I do want to say, I heard a professor at Villanova University recently say we hear so much about from voices saying teachers should not teach about diversity. Teachers, this is not part of what students should learn. They should not talk about issues of sexual orientation or what our legislature has enshrined in legislation topics that lead to divisive concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And this Professor Holm, I think that's his name, said, "I want to hear from parents and teachers and others who talk about why we should study these differences, why we should study the challenges that groups have faced and individuals have faced." So, how would you respond to that? Why would you want this kind of history and this kind of attention to contemporary issues of discrimination? Why would you want those taught and those emphasized in school?
Well, I think mostly, to develop a child, you can't develop them in a bubble. And, Johnston, Iowa is Johnston, Iowa, but outside of Johnston, there's a whole world. There's a bigger state, there's a bigger country. There's lots of things happening internationally. If, a person doesn't leave their bubble or doesn't have any experience with diverse ideas, hearing other people's experiences, that's certainly their choice if they have no interest and, they're just focused on, certain things. Everyone has choice. But I think my concern is there should always be an availability of choice. There should always be open discussion. You may not agree with everything that's being taught, discussed, but you at least have an opinion. You're entitled to your opinion. You're entitled to decisions that you make, but that shouldn't impact other people. And if you, don't want a child to learn about something as a parent, that's your prerogative. But also at the same time, once that child grows up, they're going to be an adult. And are you providing them a service or a disservice by limiting their ability to become a free thinker, to process information, make their own decisions, and learn about other people's experiences when they go out in the world? And so for me, I've always been a proponent of, trying different things, learning different things. If you don't know, ask. If you are not in favor of something, that's great. If you disagree with something, that's great. But make sure you understand the issue, before you form your opinion, and understand both sides. For me, I like to know what I know, and I know how I feel about things, but I also like to hear what is going on the other side, just so I can maybe make sense of it. I don't understand why, why is this such a concern, or why do these parents feel this way, or why are they worried about learning about someone else's experience? Um, and I think there's a lot of fear. And you had brought this up earlier, that there's a fear that, and maybe you didn't use this word, indoctrination, but there's a fear that they're being indoctrinated into a certain belief. That's not it at all. Being open to learning is just making yourself a better, more educated, diverse person, open to being able to live and work with other people that are not exactly like you. It's not there to indoctrinate you, or make you believe something. It's there for you to know that someone else might be living that experience, not you, but it's good for you to know about it.
Mhm. Right. Well, that's a wonderful way to close our interview, Monique. Thanks very much for talking with me today on Martin Luther King Day, January 16th,
Yes. Yes.
3. I hope you have a wonderful Martin Luther King Day. And with that, I'll sign off. And this has been Monique Zhao from Johnston, Iowa. Thank you, Monique.
Thank you. It was great talking with you.
Thanks a lot.